I went hiking because I was trying to quit drinking. That's the clean truth. I had been sober for a little over 3 weeks, long enough for my body to stop shaking but not long enough for my head to quiet down. My therapist suggested long walks, quiet places, no phone. Something about building patience and learning to sit inside discomfort. I picked a state forest I had been to years before, somewhere with old logging trails and low traffic. It wasn't scenic. It wasn't popular. It felt like a place where nothing asked questions. I didn't tell anyone where I was going because I didn't want to explain myself or deal with concern that felt louder than my own thoughts. I parked at the trailhead just after late morning. The lot was empty except for my car and an old rusted truck that looked abandoned. The trailhead sign was cracked and sun-bleached. The map was faded, and parts of it were scratched out, like someone had dragged a rock across it on purpose. I assumed vandalism. I didn't linger. I shut my phone off and left it in the glove box, like I'd been told to do. I carried water, trail mix, a cheap compass, and a paper map I'd printed at home. The first stretch felt normal. Dirt path, tall trees, scattered light. I passed broken stumps from logging decades earlier. I noticed boot prints in the soft ground, not fresh but not old either. Deep prints, heavier than mine. I assumed another hiker had gone through earlier that day or the day before. It didn't bother me. I liked the idea that someone else had been there recently. It made the place feel used, not forgotten. After about 2 hours, the trail narrowed. The markers thinned out. I came to a side path that wasn't on the map. It was barely there, just a line of flattened brush and packed dirt that broke off from the main trail. It looked like an old shortcut, maybe used by rangers or hunters. I told myself I would follow it for a short distance, then turn back. I wasn't chasing anything. I just wanted to walk. The forest changed as I went farther in. The air felt thicker. The light dropped fast even though it was still early. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It felt hollow. No birds, no insects, no wind. The sound of my own steps felt too loud. I checked my watch. It said 2:17 p.m. I realized I had been walking downhill for longer than made sense. According to the map, I should have crossed a creek by then. I hadn't seen water in over an hour. That's when I noticed the trees. Several trunks had bark scraped clean in long vertical strips, higher than my head. The wood underneath was pale and smooth. No claw marks, no rough tearing. It looked like something heavy had leaned against them over and over, pressing and shifting. I touched one. The surface felt hard and dry. It didn't look new, but it didn't look old either. I smelled something sour, almost like wet metal. It reminded me of the smell you get when you leave tools outside too long. I kept telling myself it was rotting leaves or stagnant water somewhere nearby. I drank some water and kept moving, trying to stay focused on the walk instead of the feeling building in my chest. A few minutes later, I found a pile of rocks stacked right in the middle of the trail. Not a cairn. Too messy, too big. Some stones were half buried, like they had been pressed down by weight. Dirt was compacted around them. I stood there longer than I meant to, trying to understand why someone would do that. It felt deliberate, not decorative, not helpful. That was when I decided to turn around. Going back felt wrong almost immediately. The trail didn't look the same. The slope felt steeper. My calves burned fast. I had to stop twice even though I hadn't been tired before. The quiet pressed in harder. My breathing sounded shallow, like it didn't belong to me. At one point, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, heavy. They matched my pace. When I stopped, they stopped. I waited. Nothing moved. I told myself it was my echo or my blood rushing in my ears. I started walking again. The sound followed. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on the ground, counting steps, trying not to panic. Then I saw a torn piece of orange survey tape tied to a branch ahead of me. It was frayed, old but bright. I knew for a fact it hadn't been there before. I would have noticed it on the way in. The knot was tight, pulled hard. That was when I ran. I didn't sprint. Couldn't. I moved fast enough to feel out of control. My foot slipped once, and I scraped my palm on a rock. I kept going. The footsteps didn't get louder, but they didn't fade either. They stayed right where they were, close enough to feel. The main trail came into view just as the light started to thin. I didn't slow down until I reached the trailhead. The rusted truck was gone. The lot was empty again. My hands shook as I unlocked my car. I sat inside for several minutes before starting the engine. My phone had no signal the entire hike. When I turned it on, I saw 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. No voicemail. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. I didn't report anything that day. I drove home, showered, and drank water until my stomach hurt. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the hike in pieces, trying to figure out what I had actually experienced. The explanation came later, slowly, through research and a park notice I found online weeks after. The side path I took had been part of an unofficial access route used years earlier by a private logging crew that lost their permit after repeated safety violations. Heavy machinery had damaged parts of the forest. Trees had been stripped when equipment leaned against them during long idle periods. The rock piles were makeshift anchors used to stabilize winches on steep slopes. They were never cleared because the operation was shut down fast and quietly. The smell came from old metal debris buried under wet soil, rust, oil residue, and decaying equipment parts that never got hauled out. The quiet made sense too. That section of forest had lower wildlife activity due to soil contamination and repeated human disturbance. The footsteps were harder to accept until I read about the seasonal survey teams that still moved through the area, marking unstable ground and monitoring erosion. They worked without phones to avoid interference. They wore heavy boots. They were trained to avoid contact with hikers and not reveal their presence unless necessary. The survey tape had been placed that day to mark a hazardous slope. I had run through an active work zone without realizing it. The calls came from a regional park number. They had picked up my vehicle on a trail camera near a restricted access point and tried to reach me after spotting movement deeper on their monitors. Nothing supernatural happened. No creature followed me. No forest closed in around me. What scared me was how close I came to disappearing without anyone knowing where I was. All because I wanted quiet and didn't want to explain myself. I never went hiking alone again. I still walk. I still stay sober. But I tell people where I'm going now. And I don't take paths that aren't on the map. I hiked that trail because my father used to. He died the year before from a heart attack in his garage, halfway through fixing a lawnmower that never worked right. Going through his house afterward took months. He kept everything: old receipts, broken tools, maps folded and refolded until the creases went soft. Near the bottom of a filing cabinet, I found a thin notebook with a cracked vinyl cover. It was his hiking journal. Short entries, dates, weather notes, distances. One line stood out because it was underlined twice. It mentioned a loop trail he liked because no one else ever uses it. That should have been my first warning. The trail wasn't listed on any updated park website. I had to cross-check old forestry maps and forum posts from the early 2000s to even find a name. It sat in a section of forest that hadn't seen funding in years. When I reached the trailhead, it showed. The sign was down, half buried in leaves. Moss covered the lettering. The information board was empty except for rusted screws and water stains. No cars, no fresh tire marks. The air smelled damp and old, like soaked wood left too long in shade. I started walking mid-morning. The trail was narrow but clear enough to follow. Ferns crowded the edges. Fallen branches lay where they had dropped, not cut or moved aside. Every few minutes, I came across old survey stakes. Bright pink, faded to a dull, chalky color. Most were snapped off at knee height. Some were bent forward, like they had been stepped on with weight behind it. I assumed erosion or careless hikers years ago. Still, I noticed how often they appeared. The forest felt quiet, but not empty. There were birds farther out, distant enough to sound flat. No insects near me. The ground stayed soft even where it shouldn't have. My boots left deep prints that filled slowly with water. About 3 miles in, I found a collapsed lean-to just off the trail. The roof had caved in, branches sagging under years of rot. Inside were beer cans from the 1980s, rusted shut, logos barely visible. They were scattered like someone had sat there for a long time, not dumped all at once. Near the back wall hung scraps of fabric knotted together and tied to a single nail driven into a support beam. The fabric looked like old shirts torn into strips. The knots were tight. The cloth smelled faintly of smoke, not fresh, but not gone either. I didn't touch anything. I stepped back onto the trail and kept going, faster now, telling myself it was just an old shelter used by hunters or kids decades ago. My father had grown up nearby. He would have been hiking here in the late 70s, early 80s. The timing lined up. That thought should have comforted me. Didn't. The trail began to curve uphill. Trees grew closer together. Light thinned. I checked my watch and then the map. I was still on track. The loop would crest and swing back soon. That's when I heard the whistling. It wasn't a tune, just a single rising note, soft but clear, repeated every minute or so. It echoed wrong. The sound felt closer than it should have been, like it was bouncing off something near me instead of far away. I stopped walking. The sound came again. Same pitch, same length. I waited. No movement followed. I told myself it was wind pushing through a dead branch with a hollow core. I kept moving. The whistling continued. It didn't speed up. It didn't fade. It stayed steady like a signal timed without a watch. I came around a bend and saw the carving. My father's name was cut into the trunk of a tree about chest height. The letters were uneven. The R leaned back slightly, just like in his handwriting. He always struggled with that letter. The carving wasn't deep, but it was clean. The edges were sharp. The bark around it hadn't grown over. The tree itself was young. I knew trees well enough to tell. It was maybe 20 years old, younger than me. There was no way it had been there when my father hiked this trail. My stomach dropped hard. I stepped closer, then stopped. The whistling came again, closer now, or maybe I just couldn't tell distance anymore. I didn't wait to understand it. I turned around and walked back the way I came, fast but controlled. I didn't run. I didn't want noise. I didn't want to fall. The trail felt different going back. Stakes I remembered were gone or shifted. One snapped stake lay across the path where it hadn't been before. The lean-to was harder to spot, like it had sunk back into the trees. I didn't look for it. The whistling stopped at some point, and that scared me more than the sound. I reached the trailhead earlier than I expected. My car sat alone where I had left it. I drove straight home. That night, I pulled out the journal again. I wanted to read the entry about the loop, to check the date, the details. The page was gone, torn out clean along the binding. No ragged edge, no scraps left behind. I checked the floor, the trash, the box I'd stored it in. Nothing. The explanation came slowly over weeks, through public records and old local history archives. That section of forest had been used for informal group camping in the 70s and 80s. Seasonal workers, loggers between contracts, people passing through. Some stayed longer than allowed. Fires were common, alcohol more so. The survey stakes marked land boundaries during a dispute that lasted years. Many were broken intentionally during confrontations over access. The lean-to matched descriptions from a temporary camp dismantled after repeated safety complaints. The fabric strips were consistent with old fire-starting bundles, used to keep cloth dry and ready. The smoke smell lingered in the wood. The whistling matched a known practice among hikers and workers in dense forest. A single tone used to mark position without shouting, repeated on a timer to avoid startling wildlife. Sound travels strangely in wet timber, bending and compressing. As for the carving, I found a record of my father volunteering with a local trail survey group in the late 90s. He revisited old routes to document changes. He often carried a knife. The tree would have been young then. The carving would still look fresh. The missing journal page made sense once I accepted that grief had blurred my memory. I had removed it earlier, weeks before the hike, and misplaced it during sorting. I eventually found it folded inside a map envelope. The underlined line was there, just as I remembered. Nothing followed me on that trail. Nothing waited for me. What unsettled me was realizing how much of my fear came from wanting to feel close to my father again, and how easily familiar places turn strange when memory and loss overlap. I haven't been back. I don't need to be. The trail was never empty. It was just quiet enough for me to hear my own thoughts, and that was the part one wasn't ready for. August 2020 felt hollow. Everything was shut down, classes were online, and time had lost shape. We were 4 college friends sharing a rental house and trying to pretend we were handling lockdown better than we were. Hiking felt like the only legal way to leave the walls without breaking rules or lying to ourselves. The Olympic Peninsula was one of the few places still open. Forest, rain, distance. Sounded safe. Sounded quiet. The trail we chose was listed as moderate. A loop. No warnings. No seasonal closures. Nothing that suggested risk beyond sore legs. We parked near a gravel turnout off a narrow road. There was one other car already there, dusty and old, parked crooked like it had been left in a hurry or by someone who didn't care much anymore. No one else around. No voices. No doors slamming. Just trees and the low sound of wind moving through them. The first few miles felt normal. Tall trees, thick moss, filtered light. The ground was soft in places, damp but not muddy. We stayed close together without thinking about it. We had masks in our packs but didn't wear them. There was no one to pass. The air smelled clean and cold. Felt like relief. About 5 miles in, we started noticing the trail markers. Some were bright plastic, zip-tied to branches. They looked new. Others were old wood, nailed crookedly into tree trunks, gray and splintered. The spacing made no sense. Sometimes 2 markers within 20 feet of each other, then nothing for a long stretch. We kept checking the ground, making sure the path stayed clear. It did, but barely. The trail felt less used the farther we went. That was when we started hearing movement to our right. Not constant, not fast. Heavy movement. Branches snapping low to the ground. Slow pressure sounds, like weight shifting. It didn't move like deer. It stayed parallel with us. When we stopped, it stopped. When we walked, it walked. We tried to act casual. None of us said much. The forest felt thicker there, darker even though it was early afternoon. The smell came next, musky, thick, like wet fur and rot mixed together. It clung to the air and followed us. When we stopped, it faded. When we moved again, it came back. It wasn't everywhere. It felt localized, like it was moving with something. My throat tightened, and I started breathing through my mouth without realizing it. At a creek crossing, one of us knelt near the bank to refill a bottle. That's where we saw the footprints. The mud was soft and dark, churned near the water's edge. The prints were wide and uneven. They didn't look right for boots. There was no tread, no clear heel, just pressure marks, deep with long toe shapes that sank into the mud. They pointed along the creek, then up toward the trees. We stood there longer than we should have, staring at them, trying to force them into something familiar. We kept going. The loop should have started bending back by then. According to the map, we should have been heading downhill soon. Instead, the trail kept climbing. The incline wasn't steep, but it didn't stop. The sun angle felt wrong. The light was flatter, dimmer, like late afternoon even though it wasn't. The trees grew closer together. Older, thicker trunks, more deadfall. The forest felt crowded, like everything had grown fighting for space. The markers got worse. Some pointed one way, others another. A few looked freshly moved. We didn't split up. We stayed tight, moving faster now, not running but not enjoying the walk anymore. The movement to our right stayed with us. It didn't rush. It didn't retreat. It stayed just out of sight, close enough to hear branches bend and snap. Then we heard the exhale. Came from behind us, close. Not a growl, not a roar, just air being pushed out slowly and deliberately. A deep breath released on purpose. It was loud enough to feel in my chest. That sound stripped away any remaining doubt. We ran. The trail blurred. Roots and rocks flashed underfoot. I stumbled once and caught myself on a tree, skin tearing on bark. No one stopped. We didn't look back. The sound of movement exploded behind us. Faster now, heavier. The smell grew stronger, sharp and choking. My lungs burned. My legs shook. I focused on staying upright. The forest thinned suddenly, and the trail widened. Gravel cut into dirt. The parking area came into view like a relief I didn't trust yet. We burst out of the trees and didn't slow until we reached where the cars should have been. The dusty old car was gone. Our car was still there. Nothing else. No sign of anyone. No voices. No engine noise fading away. Just an empty turnout and the forest standing still behind us. We left immediately. No one suggested staying. We drove in silence, hands shaking, windows down, breathing hard. The smell clung to us for miles before fading. The explanation came later, pieced together over weeks of reading and quiet research. That section of trail had been rerouted multiple times over the years due to erosion and wildlife activity. The old wooden markers belonged to a previous loop that was never fully decommissioned. The newer plastic ones marked a temporary route meant to keep hikers away from a protected area used by large animals during late summer. The Olympic Peninsula has a dense population of Roosevelt elk. During August, mature bulls move through lowland forest corridors, especially near water. They travel silently when they want to. They are heavy enough to break branches low to the ground. Their smell is strong during rut buildup, thick and musky. Their tracks, when pressed into wet soil, don't look like boots. They don't have tread or clear heel marks, just weight and shape. The exhale matched descriptions from wildlife researchers. Elk expel air forcefully when startled or asserting presence. Not a sound meant to scare, just a signal. The inconsistent markers had led us closer to an active movement corridor. The uphill stretch made sense once we saw elevation maps. The loop bent back farther than expected, but only if the correct route was followed. The dusty car belonged to a seasonal wildlife monitoring team. Their schedules were staggered to avoid contact during lockdown. They left early that day after spotting animal movement near the trail and closed their section without updating the public listing in time. Nothing chased us because it wanted us. Nothing stalked us out of hunger or malice. We crossed into a space that wasn't meant for people at that moment, guided there by poor maintenance and bad timing. What stayed with me wasn't the animal. It was how fragile the line felt between normal and wrong. How quickly a safe plan unraveled. We all remember that day differently. The distance, the sounds, the moment we decided to run. That difference scares me more than the explanation, because it reminds me how fear bends memory. None of us hike together anymore. We still talk, just not about that trip. The forest didn't do anything unnatural. It didn't need to. We were training. That was the reason, clean and official. Navigation, endurance, stress exposure under controlled conditions. No phones, no GPS, just paper maps, compasses, red lights, and time checkpoints. The kind of exercise meant to strip comfort down to basics and see what was left. I won't say where it was. Not because it's secret, but because the place itself isn't the point. It was dry, rocky, and empty for miles in every direction. No trails, no signs, no landmarks that meant anything unless you learned how to read them. We staged in late afternoon and moved out as the light dropped. The heat bled out of the ground fast. By full dark, the air felt sharp in the lungs. Our packs were light but dense. Water, food, maps sealed in plastic, compasses checked and rechecked. Headlamps stayed off unless needed. Red lights only. We spaced ourselves carefully, close enough to track but far enough to work independently. The terrain forced attention. Loose stone, shallow washes, ridges that looked close but took an hour to reach. Sound carried oddly. A boot scuff could echo, then vanish. We moved steady, checking bearings, counting steps, watching the slope angle change underfoot. Around midnight, we cut across a shallow basin to intercept a planned route line. That was where we saw the tracks. They crossed our path at an angle, pressed into a patch of fine dust between rock shelves. Barefoot, clear enough that the shape stood out without effort. Long stride, even spacing, no stumble marks, no hesitation. The edges were clean, like the foot had come straight down and lifted again without slide. The prints came from open ground, crossed our route, and ended at a wall of stone where the surface turned solid and sloped upward. No continuation. No scuff where someone would have climbed. Just nothing. I knelt and checked the depth. The pressure was deep, deeper than expected for the build suggested by the footprint. Toes long, splayed slightly, heel narrow. No sign of fabric or tread anywhere nearby. The dust hadn't been disturbed beyond the prints themselves. Whatever made them hadn't dragged anything, hadn't paused, hadn't doubled back. We marked the spot on the map and moved on. There were explanations. There were always explanations. We kept our pace. An hour later, the clicking started. At first, it sounded like small stones shifting under weight. A dry tap, then another. Irregular. Coming from above us, then off to the side. Not close enough to pinpoint. Not far enough to ignore. The terrain was full of loose rock. Temperature change could do it. Animals moved at night. Wind could funnel through gaps and knock debris free. The sound didn't settle into a pattern. It moved. We climbed toward a ridgeline, slow and deliberate. The clicks followed, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. They came from different elevations, never two at once, never steady enough to predict. When we stopped, the sound stopped. When we moved, it resumed after a delay. I felt the muscles between my shoulders tighten. My breathing stayed even, but it took effort. The dark pressed in harder on the ridge. The horizon flattened. The stars felt too bright. We crested and scanned the next stretch with red light kept low. That's when we saw the movement. Along the far ridgeline, silhouetted against the sky, something stood still. Tall, thin, upright. No visible gear. No reflective surface. It didn't move when our light swept past. It didn't shift or turn. It held position like it belonged there. Distance was hard to judge. The scale felt wrong. Could have been closer than it looked or much farther. The shape didn't match rock or scrub. It broke the line cleanly. The clicking stopped. I checked my compass. The needle spun once, a quick tight circle, then settled. I tapped it. It held. I checked again. Same reading. Equipment glitch, maybe. Local interference. The maps showed mineral deposits in the area. Iron-rich rock could throw readings briefly. One of my partners leaned close and breathed shallow. He swore he smelled blood. Not a strong scent, just a copper note under the dust. I didn't smell it. My mouth tasted dry, chalky. Still, I believed him. Stress sharpens some senses and dulls others. That was part of the exercise. We adjusted course and continued. The silhouette remained on the ridge until the angle changed and the land swallowed it. The clicking returned, farther off now, less frequent. We reached the next checkpoint late. Our timing was off. Fatigue had crept in faster than expected. Small errors stacked. Bearings drifted. Pace counts slipped. Nothing dramatic, just enough to matter. We called the exercise early before dawn. The return was quiet. No more tracks. No more clicking. The basin looked ordinary in gray light. Rocks, dust, nothing else. Our boot prints overlaid the older marks, smudging them into nothing. The official report blamed equipment malfunction and fatigue, compass interference, auditory misinterpretation, night navigation stress in unfamiliar terrain. All accurate, all acceptable. Unofficially, the site was removed from future training rotations. Later, away from the paperwork, the pieces lined up in a way that made sense without needing anything unreal. The barefoot tracks matched those documented in the area years earlier, attributed to a transient individual living rough among the ridges. Someone who avoided roads and shelters. Someone who moved at night to stay unseen. Long strides meant endurance. Clean prints meant practiced movement. The clicking matched stone-on-stone contact from deliberate foot placement on unstable rock, used to test weight before committing. Climbers and experienced scramblers do it without thinking. Spread across elevation, the sound would jump locations as someone paralleled our route from above, staying out of sight. The silhouette fit a person standing still, watching. Distance and darkness stretched the shape thin. Without reference points, the brain fills gaps wrong. The compass spin aligned with known pockets of magnetite mapped decades earlier but rarely mentioned outside geology reports. As for the smell, stress and suggestion can pull memory forward. blood has a familiar sharpness. Iron in dust can mimic it when the air is cold and dry. One person notices it, another doesn't. The place wasn't empty. It just wasn't meant to be shared at that hour under those conditions by people pretending the map explained everything. We didn't encounter anything beyond a human presence we weren't briefed on. Moving through land that didn't forgive mistakes. That was enough. Training teaches you limits. That night showed us one we hadn't accounted for. I was hired for seasonal trail maintenance at the start of summer. Clearing blowdowns, repainting blazes, checking drainage, flagging erosion. It paid better than my warehouse job and came with housing credits if I stayed the full term. I liked working alone. Most days were quiet in a way that felt earned. The forest didn't demand anything except attention. I worked a long, narrow section that ran away from the main trail system. No scenic overlooks. No water crossings worth stopping for. Just miles of mixed hardwood and pine, old enough that the canopy stayed closed most of the day. The access road was rough and ended far from where I usually started. Once I was on foot, it was just me, my tools, and the sound of my own movement. The first week passed without problems. I cut fallen limbs, dragged brush off the tread, repainted faded blazes. Red rectangles every few hundred yards, clean and visible. I took breaks where the map suggested good footing and shade. I ate lunch slow and drank water like I'd been trained to do. Then I started finding trash. At first it was just a candy wrapper tucked under leaves. Then an empty food pouch crushed flat. Then cigarette butts, not old and bleached, but dark and damp, pressed into the soil like they'd been dropped minutes earlier. There were no access roads nearby. No campsites listed on the map. No reason for anyone to be there except someone who wanted to be there. I told myself hikers wandered off trail all the time. People ignored rules. It was easier to believe that than anything else. A few days later, I noticed footprints crossing my work line. They overlapped mine from earlier that morning. Same boot size, maybe smaller. Different tread. They came from off trail and disappeared back into it. No gear marks. No trash near them. Just the prints. That afternoon, I found the camp. It sat 30 yards off the trail, hidden behind a stand of young trees where the ground dipped. A tarp stretched low between trunks. Rope knotted tight. Old blankets layered over pine needles. A pack leaned against a rock. No one there. No sound. The air under the tarp felt warm, trapped. A crushed can sat near the edge, still cool to the touch but not cold. The fire pit held ash that hadn't scattered yet. I stood there longer than I should have. The place felt occupied even without anyone in it. Not abandoned, not forgotten, just temporarily empty. I didn't disturb anything. I backed out the way I came and returned to the trail. I finished my section early that day and walked out without stopping. The next morning, my tools weren't where I left them. I was careful about that. I always stacked them the same way, leaned against a marked tree while I worked nearby. That day, the saw lay flat on the ground. The paint can sat open, lid off, brush resting across the rim. The handle was sticky, fresh use. I checked my pack. Everything else was there. Nothing stolen, just moved. I packed up and worked without breaks. I kept my head down and my ears open. Every snapped twig made my shoulders tighten. I skipped lunch and finished fast. On the fourth day, I reached a stretch I had completed earlier in the week. I stopped short when I saw the blazes. They had been repainted over. Same shape, same size, wrong color. Not bright enough to be obvious. Not wrong enough to look accidental. Just off. A shade darker. Close enough that someone following the trail might hesitate, then continue anyway. I checked the next tree. Same thing. My work covered, but not erased. Altered. That did something to me I didn't expect. Felt personal. Not aggressive. Not random. Intentional. I left that afternoon and didn't come back. I told my supervisor I was done. I didn't explain much. Seasonal workers quit all the time. No one pressed. 2 months later, I saw the notice. A hiker had gone missing near that section. Solo. Experienced. Day pack only. They found his car at the access road. No sign of him on the trail beyond a few miles in. No phone signal records past the parking area. No gear recovered. Search teams combed the area for weeks. They found unofficial camps deeper in the forest. Old and new, evidence of long-term squatting. Nothing tied directly to the missing man. No charges. No suspect. The explanation was simple and incomplete. The area attracted people who wanted to disappear. Some stayed quiet and unseen. Some moved trails. Some interfered with markings to control flow, push hikers where they wanted them, or keep them away entirely. Trailblazes are trust. When you change them, you change how people move. The camp I found matched others documented later. The trash matched patterns of someone who followed workers to avoid detection. The move tools were testing boundaries. The repainted blazes were practice. The missing hiker likely followed the wrong color just once. That's all it takes. I don't work maintenance anymore. I still hike, but I double-check every marker. I pay attention to what doesn't belong. The forest didn't do anything wrong. It just hid someone who knew how to use it. I went hiking because it was supposed to be our last big trip before becoming parents. That was how we framed it to ourselves. One more easy adventure before schedules tightened and priorities shifted. The trail was listed as easy, popular, well-reviewed, the kind of place with wide paths and posted distances. We picked a clear day and left early, excited in a quiet, careful way. The parking lot was fuller than expected when we arrived. Cars lined the edge of the gravel, doors closing softly, people adjusting packs. Nothing unusual at first. But as we walked toward the trailhead, I started noticing the way people moved. Couples walked faster than the posted pace. Groups stayed tight. One family with 2 kids stopped near the information board, stood there for a while, then turned around and left without taking a single step onto the trail. No argument, no confusion, just a decision made together and carried out quickly. I noticed it, but I didn't say anything. Neither did my partner. We both saw it. We just didn't want to be the one to name it. The first part of the trail felt normal. Packed dirt, well-kept edges, signs every quarter mile. We passed a few people heading back already, earlier than made sense for a trail that short. Most didn't make eye contact. One older man nodded but didn't slow. Everyone seemed focused on leaving. About an hour in, the woods changed. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden darkness or drop in temperature. It was more subtle than that. The trees grew straighter and more evenly spaced. The ground between them was clear, almost bare. No undergrowth, no low bushes or fallen limbs. The forest floor looked swept. The symmetry bothered me once I noticed it. Nature usually feels crowded. This felt arranged. The air felt heavy, like the pressure before a storm. I checked the sky through the canopy. Blue, clear, no clouds. Still, my breathing felt shallow, like there wasn't enough space between breaths. We walked on, talking less without deciding to. The trail curved gently, always visible ahead, never blocked. Sound felt muted. Our footsteps didn't echo the way they had earlier. Even birdsong was distant, stretched thin. That's when we started hearing something pacing us. Not close, not loud, just present. Footsteps or movement off to the side, always to our right. When we slowed, it slowed. When we picked up pace, it stayed even. It never gained on us. It never fell back. Felt measured. I tried to tell myself it was another hiker staying off trail, maybe taking a shortcut. But the movement didn't match human rhythm. No stumble, no brush crash, just steady motion. We didn't look into the trees. We stayed on the trail and kept moving. When we reached the viewpoint, the relief was real. Open space, a break in the pattern, a rocky outcrop overlooking a wide valley. We stepped up and took it in, but something pulled my attention down immediately. The rock face behind the viewpoint was scratched. Not words, not symbols, just deep lines carved into the stone, repeated over and over, vertical, angled, overlapping, some old and weathered, some sharp and fresh. They weren't random. They clustered in sections like someone had returned again and again to the same spots. I ran my fingers near one without touching it. The grooves were deep enough to catch a nail. Whatever made them had pressed hard and often. We didn't sit. We didn't eat. We took a few photos and turned back sooner than planned. The trail back felt longer, steeper. Sections that had been easy on the way in now burned in my legs. The symmetry felt tighter, more controlled. The pacing sound returned almost immediately. Same distance, same side. At one point, I stopped abruptly. The sound stopped too, perfectly. That scared me more than if it had continued. We didn't speak. We just walked. When the trees finally opened and the parking lot came into view, it felt like surfacing from underwater. The relief was sharp and physical, but it lasted only a second. Our car was the only one left. No other vehicles, no doors, no voices. The lot was empty except for us. We stood there longer than necessary, scanning the edges, the road, the trail entrance. Nothing moved. We drove away without stopping. We didn't talk until we were miles down the road, and even then we kept it light. We agreed we were tired, that we had built things up in our heads. We didn't look at the photos until days later. Most were normal. Trees, the valley, the sky. Then there was one taken near the end of the hike, when my partner had snapped a picture behind us without thinking. Between the trees, off the trail, something stood, tall, blurred, upright. It didn't have detail because the focus was on us. Motion blur stretched it thin like it had moved during the shot. Could have been a person. Could have been someone walking parallel, just out of focus. The shape aligned with where we had been hearing movement. We didn't delete the photo. We also didn't show it to anyone. Later, after the baby was born and life settled into something new, I looked into that trail. I found a maintenance report buried in a park update. That section had been thinned aggressively years earlier to reduce wildfire risk, removing undergrowth and spacing trees evenly. The symmetry was human-made. The heavy air matched a known pressure pocket in the valley that trapped heat on clear days. The scratches on the rock face matched damage caused by repeated use of climbing aids and metal tools during an old rescue training program that had been shut down after injuries. The marks were never cleaned or covered. The pacing sound made sense once I accepted it was another hiker moving off trail, likely uncomfortable with crowds and staying parallel to avoid passing. Someone tall, someone keeping distance. The empty parking lot came down to timing. We had entered late. Most people turned back early for reasons we never learned, and the trail had been closed briefly that afternoon for routine inspection. Notices were posted after we had already passed the board. The photo showed a person caught mid-step, blurred by low light and movement. Nothing chased us. Nothing watched us with intent. What stayed with me was how easily a safe place turned unfamiliar when context slipped, and how protective instinct sharpened everything once the idea of our child became real. We never went back. We didn't need to. Some places are fine until they remind you that control is thinner than you think.